Prashant Sharma is the head of growth for the San Francisco-based online education company Springboard. He has been instrumental in setting up the India business and scaled it from zero to several $1 million in IRR over the last couple of years. In his previous avatar, he has been an entrepreneur and also played an active role in building the startup ecosystem in India. Prashant, the stage is yours.
Thank you so much, Marta, for having me over. It's a pleasure to be here and to share my experience and also what we see is happening in the world of online education and how mentorship is transforming it. Yeah, so let's get started. Okay, so we are talking about career transitions in the age of pandemic and the impact that mentorship is driving. So without further ado, let me quickly talk about who am I, right? And what have I been doing over the last 8 years since the time I completed college. What you will see here is 3 brackets of my life, which is present right now, past, what I've done in the past, obviously, and then what I do on the side, right? So what I'm doing right now, and Marta touched upon that very well, is I'm currently heading growth for an online education company called Springboard. For those of you who, and most likely you would have never heard of Springboard, we are an online education company. We are based out of or headquartered in San Francisco. And what differentiates us though is we are an education company that has a contrarian approach, so to say, when it comes to education, because we believe the future of education is personal and it has to be personalized and also driven to create outcomes or to build outcomes for learners. So that is what Springboard is. And what I do with Springboard is I head growth for the India business. So we launched the India business 2.5 years back, or 2.5 years back is when I started working on this whole idea of getting Springboard into India. And so like the first 6 months involved working with the management team to figure out what should the strategy be for India, what resources we would need, what users will we go after, what should be the value prop, etc., etc. And then we finally launched. So that is what I am doing currently. The numbers you can very well read on your screen, so I'll not touch upon them. What I would say though is this particular journey of the last 2.5 years has been the most transformational time or the work that I have ever done in my life till now, because it is very rare that you will get an opportunity to operate like an entrepreneur, not necessarily building your own company, but still building someone else's dream. And it is very rare that you would not feel like you're not an entrepreneur, even when you're doing that. And that is what the journey has been for me. Now, when it comes to the past, so for the last several years, and 7 years to be precise, I have done what I could have to build the startup ecosystem of India. So there is an organization called Head Start, which is India's largest platform for grassroots level entrepreneurship. It's a completely volunteer driven organization. And I started out as a volunteer in 2012. That was the time when the startup ecosystem in India was very, very nascent. All these conversations that you would see happening around India when it comes to startups was not even mainstream at that point of time, right? So I associated myself in 2012 as a volunteer. In a year's time, I became the city lead, which is city in consideration here is Bangalore, which also happens to be the largest ecosystem of India. And through that, I have thankfully been at a place where I was able to help startups and other stakeholders, right, in any which ways I could have. So that is one of the paths that I cherish a lot, to be at a place and at a time which was just a sweet spot of the startup revolution, and to have contributed at that time ensured that I always had all the stakeholder support and also the impact that I wanted to generate and create. When it comes to another aspect that you would see here is obviously me being an entrepreneur or a founder. So I've tried my hands at entrepreneurship twice. One that I would like to talk about here though is short pitch. Right? So it was a one-touch pitching app for startups to investors. And when we launched it in 2016, 2015 end, it caught imagination of people. Right? And when I say that, we mean that within 6 months, the amount of media coverage we got and the number of people that were talking about that product was incredible. It had an unfortunate end, but yeah, that's one thing that I'm also proud of. In a nutshell, I've tried it twice and now I'm working full time. So I'm not an entrepreneur, so to say, in the classic sense right now. What keeps me going is the third bracket, which is side projects. So what I always do is, because I've always wanted to channelize my entrepreneurial energy, there are things that I would run on the side that helps me keep that energy going. So the two things that I'm actively running right now, one of them is to help talented developers get into top startups without having to go through any kind of a resume shortlisting, etc., the usual job search journey. And the way we do that is through a newsletter. So getting developers hired through a newsletter, the results have been encouraging, which you can see. So we have helped 30 plus developers get hired into startups in like 3 months. And that has been a great story. So the reason I wanted to touch upon that aspect is because although I am in a full-time role right now, but if I don't do side projects, I would feel lesser about myself. So that is about me, right? If you were to think about me as a person of who is Prashant, you're talking to someone who loves or who is into marketing and loves working at the intersection of marketing, products, and people. And that is what my journey has been till today. Okay, so let's talk about online education, right? And we are talking about online education in the times of pandemic. How is it looking like? Now, all of us have heard of the data. All of us have heard and read the news. We have seen that, Coursera raised millions of dollars. Every startup who's into education seems to be raising money. But what exactly is happening and what is driving that? Okay. What you will see here is a lot of data. So don't worry about the data. Let me give you a quick summary, right? Now, EdTech, in the latest prediction that was done before the pandemic, was supposed to become a $350 billion industry by 2025. Now, this is before the pandemic. This number has shot up and gone beyond $450 billion, right? Now that is the kind of impact from a mere $100 billion industry that it was in 2015. It will cross a $450 billion industry in 2025. This kind of a surge for any industry is uncommon, right? And when that happens, companies of large, medium, and small scale will get created all through the world. What we are seeing now is exactly that, right? So we are seeing Coursera reporting that they have had 500% increase of users from the same period last year. There have been numerous unicorns. The world's largest and the most valued or the most valuable education company by Jews comes from India, and it just became most valuable very, very recently. Even in India, the funding in the entire startup ecosystem has gone down. The funding of education companies compared to last year has increased multiple folds, right? When you hear funding news in India today or even around the world, most likely it is going to be an education company that is getting funded. Now, let's come to, it is very important to know what is driving this, right? So let's come to that. and this context is important because we are talking about education in the times of pandemic and how mentorship is driving that, right? So that's why this is very important to know what is driving this. So, all of us are unfortunately going through a time which is keeping everyone at home, right? That directly means that people are not commuting to their office, right? Which has a direct correlation to the fact that in your previous, like before pandemic, if you always knew that you had a certain skill gap or you wanted to learn something, now when it comes to learning, this can have a direct correlation to your job. It can be learning things that is outside of your job, or it can be something that you just want to learn because you are someone who always wanted to learn. Imagine a scenario. You used to spend 2 hours commuting back and forth from the office, and suddenly you have that time for yourself. What you do with that time, more often than not, you would invest that time to grow yourself. And looks like that is what the world is doing, right? No matter what you read on the internet, it would point to this single fact. People are choosing to invest that extra time in growing themselves. Now, why are they choosing to grow themselves? It is not a recent conversation that the world and the world of technology specifically evolves at a rapid and a very fast rate. People have known that to stay relevant, an average millennial would need to upskill 5 to 7 times, anything between that. To know that and to not do anything is a very uncomfortable situation and a position to be in. And suddenly, when you have time to cover that gap, you will do whatever it takes to cover that gap to stay relevant. And now, because of the pandemic, the world has become even more uncertain. So suddenly you don't even know what kind of jobs would exist, would not exist, what you need to be skill wise, and what you need to invest in education wise. So probably you will end up learning whatever you feel is important. And that is what is driving this whole craziness and the whole euphoria around education. Uh, and numbers speaks for themselves, right? Like if you look at the total number of, or the amount of investment that has gone into education, close to $800 million, and this data is till June. If you look at till August, it has crossed $1 billion already. And that's an incredible amount of investment that an education industry is receiving, which was never the darling of VC firms or the venture capital investors. So that is the context about what is happening and why it is happening. Now, let's talk about how exactly the world is learning. Now, most of you listening to this would have been more likely, or most likely you would have gone to a school for sure. You've gone to a college or university, right? And what happens in a school or university or a college system is this, right? Now, the idea of education seems to be, till now and till very recently, has been centered around the fact that there'll be one professor or one teacher who feels that that teacher knows every single student sitting in the class, like to a detail, where he or she can teach in a manner such that every learner would actually end up learning and succeeding in life. And what we call this at Springboard, and also the new model of education, is one size fits all. So if there are, let's say, 50 students sitting in a university or a college, a professor comes, teaches something, almost with the assumption that everybody would have understood it. And if you're listening to this, you know how painful that experience is, because how you perceive things, what your aspirations are, what your learning styles are, cannot be compared and cannot be matched with any other single person in this world. This also means that the new model of education needs to center around you or the person who wants to learn, right? Now, how does that even work, right? Because the world has never thought about education as a concept, has always been imparting knowledge, or there is a person or a group of people or professors or teachers who are supposed to have the knowledge. They would come and impart and disappear. And what we are realizing and understanding, and the world is opening up to that idea more and more, is that model does not work, because people's aspirations are not met, learning styles are different, their outlook is different, they want to do different things with the knowledge that they get. What do you do, right? And how do you even solve that problem? And this is where the world has started innovating. Now, just to add one more thing here, if you, on this point, if you think back and correlate the early online education revolution that the world went through, which was, you know, when Coursera started, or when Udemy started, when Udacity came into the picture, and all of these big online learning platforms that you know, they just tried to replicate this one size fits all model onto the internet, right? Or brought it online. The reason why they failed is exactly why the university does not work, because the model remains the same. You know, it is not adapting to people's style. So what do you do then is this, right? Uh, education needs to be very, very personal, right? And what I mean by that is you would want to learn with someone whom you want to become like. You would want to learn from someone whom you want to become like, because that person understands your background, number one. Number two, that person understands your aspirations. Number three, that person would almost not, will always be not your teacher, but your guide. So think of, you know, and the example depicts this beautifully. You know, a guide or a mentor does not handhold people. They show you the right path. They solve the problems that you would face in the journey to become successful, right? And because you will work personal and one-on-one, you will craft your learning journey and create your learning journey in a way that you want to learn, not in the way that the world wants you to learn or the university wants you to learn, right? This model of learning or education also means that we are seeing a new revolution where to become a professor, you know, in the conventional sense, you don't need to be a professor at a university. If you are a successful operator, you can change people's lives by coaching them and mentoring them, right? Now, in the parlance of education, what does that mean? What does, you know, like you can coach anyone and make them successful mean? If, and there are, you know, imagine, right, there are Airbnbs, Facebook, Pinterest, Twitter, Flipkarts, like successful companies all around the world, and there are operators who have spent years working in these companies. Let's say you want to learn marketing, right? And there is a head of marketing at Facebook. Now that person wants to mentor. If you can give that person an infrastructure to mentor upcoming people who want to learn marketing, it is becoming more and more evident that people would prefer that person over a credentialed university, right? Because your learning will be actionable, your learning will be applicable to the jobs that you will do, and you will learn from someone that you want to become like, right? And that is what we are seeing in this new world or the new age. Okay. So we spoke about what we were doing earlier, right? And when it comes to the university model and why one size fits all does not work, and why the world is moving to one size fits one. What does this mean, right? Because the university would not disappear. University may come online, as we are seeing right now. So we are seeing more and more schools and colleges almost like forced into adopting the model of coming online because of the pandemic. Now, if you have to understand this phenomenon which is happening in the world, what would the future university look like from your perspective, from a learner's perspective, from somebody who wants to transition into a new career? What does that mean? It means that the university of future would be designed to fit your life. It would not ask you, want you, need you to quit your job, to move cities, to give up everything that you were doing in your life and just focus on education. It will be a model which you can learn anytime, anywhere, at your own pace. Second is the new university, which is online and which is already happening in the world, is a learn by doing. It is not focused on it is focused on portfolios and not focused on degrees, right? we are, the pace at which the world is moving away from degrees has only become faster because of the pandemic, right? Because when companies now hire, they look for the evidence of the skill set, not the certification of the skill set. And that is what we mean by project based and learn by doing. That is what the university of the future would start doing and is already doing. Personalized, we spoke about this quite a bit, and I shared the fact that if you look at even yourself, how you perceive a certain concept, how you understand that concept, and how your friend understands that concept has a difference, right? And that is why you need to learn with someone who would make you understand each and every concept in a way that you understand. And that is what personalization of education and adapting to each and everyone's learning styles mean. So the university of the future would always take care of personalization. 4 is human support and accountability. And this is a very important point, right? Like the first phase of online education revolution almost thought of, and I said that earlier also, almost said that we will take the university infrastructure, put it online, and that would be known as online education. What the world has realized is content was never actually education, right? Content is a means to learn. It is not education. Because when you're looking to transition or build a new career, you need all kinds of human support and accountability at every instance that your motivation would drop. Now, why is this important, right? Because content, as I said, is a means. When you're learning something new, you would need to be inspired. You would need to be motivated. You would need to be pushed through. When you're feeling down, you need to be brought up. All of this can be done by different sets of human. So there can be a mentor that you can have. There can be a coach. There can be other support system, right? You would have heard this concept of, let's say, community. This is called putting actual humans to ensure that you don't feel lonely. Because when online education tried replicating and bringing everything in the first phase online, then they just put content online with nothing in between. And that is why you would have probably you would have heard of these stories wherein certain platforms have very low completion rates. Why? Because nobody wants to read content, right? They want to interact, they want to understand what others are doing, what progress they are making, what projects they are working on, etc., etc., right? And online education should not look and feel very different from how a university looks and feels like. So that is what human support and accountability is. And finally, and most important, specifically online education will not work and will only work in the future if it has direct correlation to your outcome. People, specifically professionals, take to learning when they have a fixed outcome in their mind. Now that outcome more or less happens to be a new job, a new career, or a transition. If your education does not help you meet your goal, that education is more or less worthless, right? And that is why the university of the future has to be directly accountable to get you to that outcome. If it can't, then that education was not worth it in the first place. Now, all these 5 things put together is what I believe, and also at Springboard we believe, is the future university and how it will look like. And also this is the future of online learning and the future of education. Uh, Now, what is happening if you have followed the world of education and how things are evolving? This is exactly where more and more work is happening. Even in the US, there are players, let's say Thinkful or others, who are investing resources and money to build these 5 levers. Because you cannot just survive in this market, or you cannot help meet people's aspiration by providing them content alone. Yeah. Okay. So let me tell you and share a story about mentorship, because That is what we spoke about in the beginning, and how that is transforming careers and the power it has. So, several months back, there was this learner working at one of the biggest IT companies of India. And she was working in that organization for close to a year and a half. And this is very common in a place like India, wherein if you have worked at a large IT firm, you more time you will spend at that firm, you will start losing sight of where and how to build your career, right? If you continue in that same organization doing the same things day after day. And she was going through the same cycle. uh, the good thing there though is she knew that she had some interest in the field of AI and machine learning. The other added advantage that she had was she had a genuine interest in coding, and she had done coding or programming in her life. This is the context or the background that this particular professional or the learner is coming from. Right? Now, what she didn't want was she didn't want to quit her job. Right? So she didn't want to go to a university for 2 years for, let's say, a master's in AI, spend some $100,000 to get that master's, and even after spending that money, not knowing whether she'll actually get a job because visa regulations, this, that, like relationships between two countries these days evolve and change at a very fast rate. So she was just not open to the idea of spending so much money, investing time, quitting her job, and then going into a uncharted territory just to move and shift her career into machine learning and artificial intelligence. Her goal was very clear, right? So what I am doing in this IT company right now, I don't necessarily enjoy, and I want to move to a new age technology, which is machine learning, and work in that industry. Perfect. But the restriction was all of these that we spoke about. What did she do? She obviously discovered Springboard. I may not recall how, but she inquired with us and started understanding what we do and how we operate and how we work. And she got started with learning. Now, on the other hand, there was this another person who has never been a professor in his life or a teacher or anything, right? He has just been someone who has spent enough time, 8 years to be precise, working as a machine learning engineer or slash AI engineer in some of the top startups and companies in India itself. Right? And he was someone whom we have onboarded as a mentor. Right? Now, when this girl came on board, we matched her with this particular person. Now, imagine the scenario. The mentor has never taught in the classical sense, right? The learner has a big goal. If not met, she will be dissatisfied for a long, long time in her life. Right? They start working together for 9 months. Every single week, they do a video call around the topics that she's learning, what help she needs. The mentor ended up obviously talking about his experience and how to ensure you do the right projects, how to ensure that you are able to portray yourself in the right manners during the interview. Basically, in that 9 months, every week over a video call, the mentor worked on each and every aspect that he knew can get a person over the line when it comes to actually transitioning into a new career. And when you think about that, it means, did you learn the right things in the right way? Did you do the right projects so that it can catch the attention of the hiring managers? Did you project yourself in the right way so that you can get to the interviews? Then did you finally crack those interviews? 9 months after that, she cracked the interview. She got into a job. Now she works as a machine learning engineer at a California, San Francisco based headquartered company, but she now works out of her home. And that is the power that we are talking about, right? Like there, there are people and operators sitting all over the world working in companies like, Twitter, Airbnb, Flipkart, etc., etc., who now have the power to help people jump into new careers just because of their experience. They don't need to be teachers. They don't need to be professors. People don't need to spend humongous amount of money to build new careers. And with that, what I would ask and leave you with is what model of learning will you choose to build your career or to transition into a new career when you want to? Thank you.
I do have a few questions that I think the listeners would be very interested in listening into as well. You talked about the customization of education, especially online education, and not having one size fits all, which I agree is pretty much a 19th century concept, and it's about time we moved on from that. But one for one, really something that will be a good fit for every one of the learners out there. Is there space for other models as well to be implemented in the online educational scene?
So, just an extension of this model, right? Like we spoke about the university model or the college model where there is like one teacher or one professor and there's like hundreds of students. That model for sure does not work. And we have realized that. If not one-on-one, there is something called 1:5 or 1:10, right? Now it's an extension of how small can you keep the group so that personalization would still work and it is possible to scale the model. Now, keep in mind that one-on-one may not always be possible to scale. And that's why even when the world is moving towards personalization, it might do in 1:many or 1:x, the value of that X will be lesser so that it is still personalized. When it comes to other interactions, right? And I spoke about human support and accountability, right? And this is where there's a lot of work and experimentation going on with respect to what may or may not work. If you think about education and how you learn or how most of us have learned, a lot of our learnings have come from interactions, right? A lot of our learning have come from, like by talking to different people or the similar people who are doing the similar things or the same things. And that is where another model, which is, working quite well and which is being experimented a lot on, is a community learning, right? Wherein how can you keep the same people who are learning the same things together so that they learn better, right? Because it is easier to do that when it comes to if you are in a college or university, hard to do it when you are online, right? And how you crack it is an open problem. To be very honest, I have not seen anyone who has cracked the community model of education. One-on-one is still a very technology problem. You can solve it through technology. Community you can also solve through technology, but it feels like an ocean what you don't even know how to operate, how to behave, right? So I would say that there is an open space around community learning which nobody has really figured out how to crack it.
It is a pretty much a blue ocean at the end of the day, because like I mentioned, the system hasn't really changed up until now. We've been going with the same system since the 19th century, and only recent years, and I would say especially this year, has kind of pushed us to explore the unknown. Well, like you said, future is here, and we have to get used to the rest of our lives, I suppose. Thank you so much, Prashant. I think we'll wrap up here. It was really, I mean, I even took, I don't know if you can see it, but I took little notes for myself from your presentation.
Thank you so much.
It was really insightful and gave me a lot of food for thought when it comes to my own personal development, as well as what to do with my community. So thank you very much for the insights. They've been really helpful.